Trump issued a letter to the Ayatollah in Iran and basically gave him an ultimatum, said you have 2 months to make a nuclear deal or else what? I mean, I'm not sure. We're going to bomb Iran, go to war with Iran. I mean, what do you make of this letter, this ultimatum that he
Yeah.
issued?
Well, it's very disturbing, and it's frankly really foolish. I mean, it shows the foolishness of Trump's earlier decision to pull out of the JCPOA. The JCPOA, which is agreement between several countries to strictly monitor and limit the Iranian nuclear program. It is a nuclear power program. You know, all these accusations that they're trying to develop a bomb, we've been hearing them for like 25, even 30. I think you go back to the 1990s in the case of Israel, and there's just never been any real evidence. There's a claim that something was found back in 2003 or whatever. I think that's doubtful that was actually the true evidence. I think it was probably fabricated by the Mossad. But even if you say that, okay, anything since 2003, and that's our own intelligence committee, that was their finding. You know, that they have not been committed, involved in trying to develop a nuclear weapon. The Iranians haven't been. So anyway, but they did agree to this JCPOA, and it subjected their nuclear power program to very strict monitoring and controls, very, very strict. But Obama did it. It was his achievement. And then when Trump came in, it was one of the first things he did was to rip up that agreement. And I think partly because it was Obama's agreement. You know, that's the kind of thing Trump does. And also as, he's paying back his Zionist supporters. So yeah, he tore that up. You know, that it took years to actually make that agreement, to get all the parties to agree to it. The U.S. never, even under Obama, really abided by it. They were supposed to lift sanctions. They didn't, so from the start, the Americans were sabotaging it. And then Trump just tore it up. Now he's telling him, okay, you got to come, we've got to have a deal within 2 months or else. And the implication is that there's going to be a military attack. But, how the Ayatollah Khamenei has said that, we cannot deal with these people. And I think he's right. I mean, it's just like the history. Why should they? Again, it's, similar to what the Russians have experienced, but, even worse for the Iranians. Why should they? It took years to do this. You never abided by it. Then you tore it up. And now you're telling us that we got to do this in 2 months. Why should we believe you?
So you think there's no way that the Iranians are going to play ball with this?
Yeah. The only possibility is, this is something that Alexander McClure has mentioned, is that there was, I think the Americans actually asked the Russians to mediate. I think it's just like maybe to approach the Iranians, basically. And maybe it's just like the Russians might say, hey, at least like pretend to play ball or something. One thing, the situation is different now. We've got your back. We've signed this agreement with you. We're going to provide you with military and economic support. Your ties with China are a lot closer, than they used to be. But we've got a very unstable person in office, in the presidential office. It's actually, or somebody who's making threats. In fact, but of course, you go way back to George W. Bush and earlier administrations. There always have been threats of attacks on Iran. But maybe just we've started this agreement. We're going to work on building up your defenses. Maybe we can do something. Engage with them at some level. Maybe the Russians can encourage and say, don't worry, we're not going to pressure you to go into anything you don't want to do. But perhaps it's just best to at least talk to them and make some gestures. And then in the meantime, we can work to build up our defenses. That's a possible response to it. At the same time, I mean, the anger is such, and the cynicism is such within Iran that they just may not even want to, this is what they've said. Again, Khamenei is the supreme leader. He says, we're not even talking to them. And that just may remain firm. Where does that put, if the Iranians don't talk, then where does that put the U.S.? Okay, well, Trump has made a big threat. He sent his ultimatum. What's he going to do? They've already imposed new sanctions on them, but it's just like they've already sanctioned Iran to the gills. And it's just like as in the case, it did damage them a lot. And, it still is harmful to their economy, but they're better off than they were a few years ago, again, because of these connections with the BRICS countries. It's just not the same state of affairs. So, I mean, the sanctions just don't have the bite that they used to. And I don't know if there are many more sanctions that can be imposed on them. What can Trump do, other than a military attack, where we talked about, how difficult that's going to be and how potentially disastrous that could be for the U.S. So it may be that, again, as we've seen with Trump, there's a lot of bluster and then there might not be any action to follow it up. But it's a risky situation because it's not just Trump in this case. There are a lot of people, as we talked about, within that they've always been there in the U.S. government, in the Defense Department, in the State Department, who really are itching for a war with Iran. Fortunately, there's also been the people, the realists, that have always pushed us back from the edge of the abyss. But it's disturbing. It's just like, okay, we'll say the pro-abyss people and the anti-abyss people. Okay, so far the anti-abyss people have won, but it just takes one victory by the pro-abyss people for us to fall into the abyss. That means to actually engage in a real war with Iran, with the disastrous consequences that we know. So that danger, that risk, it never goes away. And now, it's coming to the fore again. We'll see. Maybe we've averted these crises in the past. Maybe we will again, but it's very, very worrying.
Do you feel like the situation in the Middle East is worse now than it was under Biden during the whole time under Biden's term?
Well, I don't know if it's any worse, to be honest. Okay, a lot of the things that Trump is doing are things that Biden did. He just didn't do it with as much bluster. And I think that's the main difference. Again, Biden really went after the Yemenis, the Ansar Allah, and Trump saying, you didn't do anything, but he did. I mean, they fired all the missiles they had on those ships, and those ships had to go back to port to reload. It's one thing is that I guess that the kind of missiles that they fire cannot be loaded at sea. You have to go back to a port. Now, this is one of the problems in the Ansar Allah. The Houthis are aware of this. So, we're hearing about this tremendous bombing campaign, but they're eventually going to empty the chambers of their guns, so to speak, right? And they won't be able to fire any more bullets. And they're going to have to go back to port, just like Biden did. So again, Biden, it wasn't like it was it's just sort of a perfunctory effort. He really went after them. And now Trump's doing the same. Maybe he's going after them with greater intensity. But in the end, he's going to run out of bullets too. So yeah, there's not a big change to report with respect to Yemen. And then, the genocide was ongoing under Biden, ever since October 7th, right up to the end of his reign. It was ongoing. And it was actually the ceasefire was largely due to Trump. Now that ceasefire has been torn up. And with Trump's blessing, let's be honest. He says there were reports back then that he had reassured Netanyahu that after the first phase, if you want to go back in, I'll back you. And that just seems to be true. He's going back in, and Trump's saying, we completely support you. So yeah, it's been torn up again. But we're back to where we were, basically, right? In Gaza, unfortunately, tragically. It's really awful what's happening there. And then, yeah, with regard to Iran, I mean, there was, I think, believable reports that the Biden administration, which is to say Blinken and Jake Sullivan, were considering very, quite seriously about attacking Iran right towards the end of Biden's term, and they chose not to do it. So yeah, we came close under Biden, and now we're going to come close under Trump. So far, I think again the differences are more rhetorical than not. We'll see. Substantively, we're seeing a continuation of the policy in the Middle East.
If we can't stop the Houthis, what makes us think that we can take on Iran?
Yeah. Oh, it's a very good point. The I think that the Houthi technology is largely derived from Iran. I don't know the extent to which, like, the Iranians are directly supplying them with weapons. What I've heard is that the Iranians showed them how to make these weapons, and the Houthis have actually, have modified them for their own purposes. It's Iranian-based technology, but there is a Houthi input, which I find quite extraordinary. It just shows, again, the poorest country in the Arab world, one of the poorest countries in the world, can actually develop these weapons and threaten the world's most powerful navy, actually render it impotent. The Navy has not been able to carry out its mission of protecting shipping in the Red Sea. They failed. Prosperity Guardian failed. And it failed, and the defeat was brought about by, these very, very poor people in the hills of Yemen. I mean, it's really amazing.
It is. I
Yeah.
just think about the world's most powerful navy in the world is getting thwarted, defeated by a country that doesn't even have a navy. They don't
Yeah.
even have a navy. It's incredible. And
Yeah. Right. So
but
anyway, if you just take Yemen and multiply it by 10,000, and that's Iran. Iran is a large, prosperous country with a lot of, very talented engineers, and they have developed clearly very successful military technologies, and they have been preparing for a conflict with the U.S. for, at least 20, 25 years.
it's unbelievable to think that we might actually get into a war with Iran. It's going to be a huge wake up call for Americans mostly, but a lot of the world. I mean, I think a lot of the world has slowly woken up to the illusion of U.S. military might thanks to the Ukraine conflict, and also thanks to the Houthis over the past year. But this war is just not going to go the way that the supporters of it think it's going to go. And it's kind of hard for me to understand how they can't see that, because we've had a lot of evidence of just this past year of what our capabilities are, and just this idea that we could take on Iran when they also have a defense contract with Russia,
Right.
and they're very closely allied economically, at least, with China. This is absolute insanity. This will, if Trump does that will be his legacy.
Yeah.
That way will completely sink it. And it just, I guess the thing we can say with Trump, I was asking if it was more dangerous under Biden or Trump. I mean, with Trump, the thing is, things move a lot quicker, so it's just like things can change, and it's hard to know where it's going to go. But the way he's
Yeah.
talking with Iran, if he does this, we're talking about the global economy will crash. The Strait of Hormuz will get shut down, oil disruptions, U.S. aircraft carriers sunk to the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
Don't play with this, man. This is not. I hope we don't go down this road.
Yeah.
It's so amazing that we're even considering it. It's like, okay, sir, you have two options. One will be endless suffering and pain and death, and the other one is just a nice path full of ice cream and lollipops and sunshine. Which one do you want to take? It seems to be that clear, these two options on choosing a conflict with Iran, and we're actually thinking, we'll go down the endless suffering path.
Yeah. Well,
Madness.
yeah. Another thing to point out, another consequence of a war with Iran can be relations between the U.S. and Russia. I mean, it would clearly have severe consequences for that relationship. It would put it under a lot of strain, because Russia is not going to abandon its commitment to Iran. And that's going to anger the Americans, especially as they get into a war with them. But it's also going to anger the Russians, seeing their close, not well, an ally of some kind. They don't have a mutual defense pact, but they're, it's a country that they have developed very close military and economic relations with. To see them come under attack by the U.S., it's going to make it quite difficult for those negotiations to proceed.
For sure.